Found Duckling by EvaDragon. Chapter 20, The Second Kidnapping. Summary. Danny and Damien spend some time together and then get themselves kidnapped. Danny convinces Damien to let his inner chaos gremlin out. "Hey, Damien," Danny turned to his younger brother. "Yes, Danny?" "I just wanted to, say thank you for, coming with me. You didn't have to, come with me," Danny said while rubbing the back of his neck in his signature move. "Danny, if I didn't want to come with you, I wouldn't have come," Damien replied. "Thank you. I know that I've been taking up everyone's time lately, and I know how busy you all are, but I appreciate this all the same," Danny said earnestly. Damien didn't have anything to offer him after that. They meandered in silence for a few minutes, sipping slowly on their hot, spiced apple cider. It was Damien's first time trying the warm drink. Danny had insisted that he try it. Aunt Alicia may not have liked him all that much, but she did make some damn good apple cider. And while this recipe was an exact match to his aunt's, it was close. Danny made a pleased humming sound as they passed another vendor in the market square. "Danny, while you have the self-preservation instincts of an amoeba," Danny made an indignant squawk, but otherwise didn't refute Damien's claim, "and seem to attract trouble to you like an especially strong magnet, I find your company tolerable. You're definitely better than Drake." Danny felt himself blush. That was high praise coming from Damien. They lapsed once again into comfortable silence. Danny had wanted to go to a small fall festival that was being held in Robinson Park just before Thanksgiving, and Damien had been the only one available who could go with him. But he found he didn't really mind. In fact, he had been wanting to spend some time with the younger boy anyways, so it all worked out in the end. "May I ask you a question?" "You just did," Danny said with a wide grin. "Really, Danny?" Damien glowered at his older brother. Danny shoved his shoulder lightly, but indicated that he could continue. "Why do you dislike your full name so much?" Let's find a place to sit. I have a feeling that this is more of a cultural thing," Danny explained while looking around for a bench or picnic table. He found what he was looking for and dragged Damien over to an unoccupied table. "For me personally, Vlad always said my name as more of an insult or like a cat throwing up. That's why I dislike Daniel so much. Vlad, he did a lot of things to me. Never sexually, or at least that I'm aware of, but I'm not stupid. I know that you can't create a clone of the opposite gender without adding reproductive DNA into the sequence. Whether it was mine or his, I don't know. And I'll never ask." Damien got a pinched look on his face. If Danny hadn't already taken care of that man, Damien would have seriously considered rescinding his father's no-kill rule. "You are certain he never did anything to you?" "Of that much, yes, I am. He may have been a lot of things, but I know he would never have stooped that low." "Can I ask why you don't like nicknames?" "I was raised by essentially a cult of assassins. Do you remember when you were summoned by the League of Assassins?" Damien watched as Danny nodded. "Ra's al Ghul was my grandfather." Danny's mouth formed an O of surprise. "In our culture, we were taught that we must always be formal. Anything less was met with punishment. When Richard called me Damie for the first time, not only did I dislike it, I feared that either he would be punished for doing so or I would be for allowing it, or we both would be." Danny hummed in agreement. "I can see that. But in more Western cultures, like in Europe or here in America, nicknames are pretty standard for a lot of reasons. Some of it is like me, name trauma. Some of it is due to simply not liking their name, and sometimes it's simply easier to say the nickname than it is to say the full name. I knew a girl back in Amity who told me that when she was born, her mom told her that her full name was too big for her tiny little baby body, and that's how she got her nickname. Plus, parents like to use the full name to let the child know when they're really in trouble. Danny finished with a laugh. I see. Thank you, Danny. None of our other siblings have ever bothered to explain. They all just started calling me Damie or some other derivative from the beginning, and it irritated me. I get that. Ignoring someone's preferences, especially for their name, can be almost demeaning in a way. Danny agreed with a sigh. I don't think I would mind if you called me Damie. You didn't automatically assume that you had permission. That's because I've heard you correct the others when they say it, so I figured it was something you didn't like. In the same way I don't like Daniel. I wasn't about to use a name you didn't like. That would just be wrong. Danny huffed at his younger brother. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes before they got up to deposit their trash in the appropriate receptacle. They wandered the festival for a bit longer, made a few purchases. Danny even made Damien smile, not laugh, before they began making their way back to where Alfred should have been waiting to take them home. They never made it back to the entrance of the park. Danny felt something hit the back of his head and gave a bark of warning to Damien. He struggled briefly and heard the sounds of Damien struggling before his world went dark. He woke up to the smell of salt water and piss in the air. He heard Damien snarling and swearing nearby. He glanced down at himself. Well, fuck. He was tied to a chair. At least this time they didn't use duct tape, he thought to himself. Damie, he whisper-shouted, hoping to get the younger boy's attention. Danny, are you unharmed? Damien replied in the same tone. Good, at least Damien was able to hear Danny's whisper. Danny took a moment to take good stock of himself. His head was hurting, which indicated a head wound. The back of his neck felt sticky, but he knew with his accelerated healing whatever wound had been inflicted would have either halfway healed or mostly healed, depending on how badly he'd been hit. He took another look around. They were in a warehouse, because of course they were. And at the same time, they didn't seem to be heavily guarded either. A wickedly impish plan floated across Danny's plan. The smile that formed on his face could have given the Joker wet dreams for years. Damie, I have an idea. How about we give these guys some payback before our family arrives? And how would we do that? Damien asked, interested despite himself. We're similar enough that I bet they won't even notice. I can create duplicates and hold them for about 20 minutes. That's more than enough time for some mild chaos. I can put one in my place and then one in your place. If I make you a sword of ice and then make you invisible as long as I'm holding you, we can haunt them. Do some mild damage. And then, when the others arrive, we can slide back into place. Damien looked at Danny and shared his grin. He nodded. It wasn't often that he got to indulge in his wilder thoughts of mayhem and carnage. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to think that this might even be fun. He watched as Danny phased out of his bindings and then went invisible. Damien felt a sensation akin to being dunked in ice wash over him as Danny phased him out of his own bindings. He watched as his brother created duplicates of himself and placed them in their respective chairs. They weren't perfect duplicates, but Damien also knew that the quality of the goons in Gotham weren't spectacular. Duplicates would pass muster for the time being. What happens now? He questioned his hovering partner in crime. Let me make you some weapons real quick. What do you prefer? I would prefer a wakizashi, since we are in close quarters, and some knives, in case I need to throw them, if you're able. Danny nodded. He'd seen Damien's wakizashi and knew that he could replicate it. It may not be as precise as Damien's, but it would be close enough. Danny was slightly afraid that when he started making the weapons, the light would catch the attention of their kidnappers, but for once, luck was on their side. No one looked in their direction. He was able to make Damien his wakizashi and made a zephos for himself. He was also able to make 2 daggers and 5 knives for Damien, as well as several shuriken and a dozen throwing stars. "You are quite proficient in your ice making," Damien complimented Danny. "I have to practice or I'll literally freeze over," Danny said offhandedly, testing the heft of his zephos. Damien looked at him in shock because what? He didn't have time to unpack that right now, but he would absolutely be bringing that up when they returned back to the manor. "I can only keep you invisible if I'm touching you, but if you'd rather go off on your own, that's fine too." Damien thought about it for a moment before he replied, "It would be better if we stuck together. I do not wish to explain any further injuries." Danny hummed in agreement. He took hold of Damien's shoulder and then made both of them invisible and intangible. He floated them silently to the closest goon. Damien used his wakizashi to impale the goon through the shoulder. Danny iced him to the floor. Neither cared too much if he bled out. They figured that's what he deserved for kidnapping them. His shout alerted the others, but Danny just let a bit of his eldritchness bleed through. The shadows got a bit darker. Damien used this to his advantage and dropped from Danny's touch. He attacked 3 more goons in quick succession, quickly rendering them immobile. Danny himself was having an absolute blast. He used his ice with wild abandon, knowing that it wouldn't melt until he wanted it to. While he didn't injure the goons in the same way that Damien did, he had no qualms about encasing them up to their neck in ice. If they suffered from hypothermia afterwards, well, no skin off his back. Danny's sensitive ears twitched as he heard the sound of a grappling gun being fired. He floated over to where Damien had taken down the last goon and grabbed him. Damien was about to protest when he realized what Danny was doing. Danny quickly dismissed the duplicates, then put Damien and himself back into the restraints as if they'd been there the whole time. When Signal, Nightwing, and Red Hood came flying through the windows of the warehouse, because of course they came through the windows, Danny couldn't help himself. He started cackling like mad. He chanced a small glance at Damien and found Damien with a small smirk on his face. The vigilantes looked around and saw the absolute destruction that had been caused. Nightwing just facepalmed.
"You two are absolute menaces,"
Hood sighed. He didn't bother untying them, knowing that Danny could free both of them and already had based on the number of goons in ice. Danny only cackled harder. Nightwing and Signal rounded up the goons. There were over 20 of them, and alerted both GCPD and EMS that they would need to be picked up. Neither boy had been gentle in their administration, both having to work out some aggression issues. Neither had taken well to being kidnapped, although in Damien's case it had been a semi-regular thing. Didn't mean that they had to like it. Once all of the goons were appropriately handled, Danny phased out of his bindings for the second time and cheerily bounced over to Damien and did the same thing to him. By that time, they were both grinning like loons. On one hand, the older men were happy to see Damien so freely expressing himself, but on the other hand, they kind of wished that it didn't have to be under such dire circumstances. Nightwing contacted Alfred to let him know where to pick up the 2 younger boys with a shake of his head. Tim rushed out of the manor's doors when the car pulled up the driveway. Alfred hadn't even gotten the car in park before he was pulling the door open and yoinking Danny out. He turned Danny around to check him over for injuries. He noted the sticky, dried blood on the back of his neck. His fingers glossed over the goose egg knot on the back of his head and noted Danny's wince as he did so. "Cease this at once, Drake," Damien sneered at his brother's mother henning. Danny's exhausted his powers on top of being injured. We will take him down to the cave so we can monitor him closely, Damien said with finality, hooking his hand into Danny's. Danny squawked in protest, but otherwise followed behind both of his brothers compliantly. Tim had latched onto his other hand. Wait, when had that happened? Oh well, Danny wasn't too bothered about it. Alfred appeared in front of them as he led them over to the medbay. Danny reluctantly took up occupancy on the cot. At this rate, this cot might as well have my name etched into it, he joked. Tim and Damien glared at him. But it did seem, at least to him, that he'd seen more of the medbay than he'd seen of the actual manor. Drake, were you aware that Damien threw another glare at Danny. Oh shit, full named. Steph came in and crowed. Language, Miss Stephanie, Alfred chided while looking over the now healed knot on Danny's head. Damien seemed to have gotten off unscathed. Danny, however, did appear to be suffering from a mild concussion. Yes, Daniel has to use his ice powers with regularity, or he runs the risk of freezing himself. Damien informed the family and folded his arms across his family. Snitch, Danny snarked, but there was little heat in his yell. Daniel James Drake Wayne, Tim said in a low, flat voice. Every bat in the room stilled. Danny stopped breathing. Yes? Explain now. So, I've told how cores are a ghost's everything. Their heart, brain, and all their internal organs, but also their soul. Everyone in the room nodded. Cores also act as the ghost's power base, or where their element lies. Danny's has a wind core. Vlad had an electric core, I have an ice core. But because I'm so overpowered and also gaining new powers all the time, if I don't burn off some of my energy in the form of using my ice powers, I run the risk of literally freezing over. It's how we found out that I had an ice core to begin with. When Undergrowth first attacked, I got my ass handed to me. My core hadn't fully settled. I was licking my wounds when I started to get really cold. Somehow I made it to frostbite. In a month-long crash course, he taught me how to control my ice. Apparently, ice cores are kind of rare. When it was all said and done, Frostbite warned me that if I didn't use my powers regularly, I would run the risk of literally encasing myself in ice with no way of getting out. His family, except Sam and Tucker, looked at him utterly horrified. None had ever been at risk of killing themselves from their own powers. Jason, of course, ran the risk of killing others when the pit rage got too bad, but this was something else. Why? Why do you insist on traumatizing us? Dick, who had finally gotten out of his Nightwing suit, squeaked out. Danny merely grinned, like the feral chaos gremlin he was. Notes. Damien. Why no like Daniel? Danny. Imagine a cat puking. Damien. Oh, thank you for explaining. You may call me Damie. Danny. Yay for nicknames. Danny. Hey, wanna be a chaos gremlin? Damien. I'm game. Danny. Here's a sword. Helps me practice my ice powers so I don't freeze myself over. Damien. What? Hood. Do we even need to rescue you two? Damien. If Danny doesn't use his ice powers, he'll ice himself over. Danny. Narc. Dick. Why do you love traumatizing us so much? Danny. I'm a chaos gremlin. It's literally in my DNA.